Welcome to And Yet, this season's online adult education. We are going to be starting talking about boundaries. Most of the information I've gotten from a book called The Boundary Boss by Terry Cole. It had good information, but I would not run out and just get the book, especially not on Audible. So anyway, we're going to talk about boundaries, and boundaries are actually much broader than what you may think. Oftentimes we think boundaries are just a set of yes and no and setting up what you can and can't do. And actually boundaries are much greater than that and really deal with how it is that we can act out and live out our Christianity in a way in relationship with people. It's the walking the talk portion of our belief system. So healthy boundaries not only protects you from emotional harm, but it also protects others. And it keeps your personal dignity intact and strengthens your relationships, especially the one that you have with yourself. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of things on how you deal with yourself, the boundaries that you deal with yourself, the boundaries that you either set up with other people, and then how you deal with other people and their boundaries. And right now, I see that as a really, really big issue in our society. But you do write the instruction manual on how you treat yourself. Those are your internal boundaries. And then about how others treat you, those are external boundaries. And then again, I would add how you treat others also deals with boundaries. Anytime that you choose not to be truthful or own what you really do believe, you're going to set yourself up for, an unsatisfying relationship experiences. There can be resentment, and then there's just a sense of loneliness that can come from not really truly being known. So some of the things that can affect us with boundaries, and some of these may affect you in certain situations with certain people. Other times it, just kind of depends upon where you are and how you deal with your boundaries. So even if you talk about drawing boundaries or speaking up to create boundaries, do you end up feeling either anxious, or is it dreadful, or is it something you would rather avoid? When you're paying for a service, do you avoid telling people if you are unsatisfied? Do you tend to ignore the preferences and needs, your own, for too long and then all of a sudden explode in frustration? I think many of us have done that. Do you have a very specific idea of the way that most things should be done and feel frustrated by the fact that other people are just clueless? All right. So we're talking about a variety of boundary issue spectrums here. Do you often feel sad, angry, or resentful that people don't respect your boundaries? Do you often fear or avoid speaking up if you disagree or have an opinion from the group that's different or the person that you're with? Do you feel offended or compelled to correct the behavior of others? Boy, there's lots of judgment being thrown around right now, and that falls right into that. Do you feel betrayed? If you feel betrayed by somebody, then do you not have the conversation with them? Do you avoid them? If your friends and family have an issue, do you feel compelled to make suggestions or find solutions for them, even if they have not asked for your help? Boy, everybody seems to know the way things should be run and what should be done now. And this would be one of those other boundary issues there. So here are our types of boundaries. Often we have thought, and many people think, and men especially think, that having rigid boundaries is healthy. Rigid boundaries are not healthy. First of all, you can see if you have some rigid boundaries if you don't ask for help when you need it. Or do you kind of stay a little bit closed or detached? People would say, oh, they're a little distant, or they're just really private. And some of that's, yes, is personality, but some of it also has to do with boundaries, and that those boundaries can be set up to minimize rejection. Would people say that you are unavailable, closed off, inflexible, authoritarian, aggressive, even maybe abusive? The attitude with very rigid boundaries is it's my way or the highway. So strict boundaries are not healthy because they get in the way of building healthy relationships. And any healthy relationship, there has to be compromise. And what is hard to understand is that some of these very rigid boundaries are driven by actually a fear. And it's a fear of being vulnerable, a fear of really being known. And most people would not think that rigid boundaries are rooted in fear, but they actually are. And the other thing that you need to know is that there are some things in all of us that you may have rigid boundaries. And it's good to take a look at that and then take a look at what is this I'm really afraid of here? What is it that's really bothering me? Porous boundaries are at the opposite end of the boundary spectrum. Porous boundaries can mean that you either overshare personal information or you say what yes when you want to say no. You can find yourself overly investing in the problems of others. So you're only concerned about others and other people. It's almost like you don't know yourself well enough and what you need to be able to have healthy relationships. You can put up with disrespectful or abusive behavior. And a person that may have really porous boundaries can be seen as very, very, very nice and very accommodating. You know, you can ask that person to do anything because they will never turn you down. You are often very influenced by people's thoughts, feelings, and problems more than your own. So you're going to be looking outside of yourself. Being indecisive is often a common occurrence with porous boundaries. You don't really know yourself well enough so that you're very indecisive. And here's the clincher. I've heard this by many, many people, mostly by women. As long as everyone else is happy, I'm happy. That's a big red flag when you're taking a look at porous boundaries. All right, healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are flexible, which means you can change your mind, and they are also balanced. So with healthy boundaries, you really value your own thoughts and opinions, and you do feel comfortable asking for and accepting help. You know when to share personal information and with whom, and you accept the boundaries of others, including someone saying no to a request. This is where we're getting into some issues and some problems. When you have people that think that they know the answers to everything, then if they go to somebody and say, this is what you need to do, and the other person says no, we're finding people that don't respect those boundaries. And then it kind of almost escalates that behavior where manipulation can be used, other tactics, which we will get into next time, talking about how do you get your way. And so part of having healthy boundaries is respecting other people's boundaries. You would be seen as perceived as dependable, trustworthy, or confident. People would say you keep your word. There's pretty healthy communication, and you take responsibility for your own happiness and for your own problems and for your own mistakes. You are not emotionally reactive. When people talk about that, they think that, either it's somebody who bursts into tears or flies off the handle. And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is that many, many of our boundary kind of behaviors have come from what we have been taught as we have grown up. And sometimes what can happen is that you respond to a boundary issue or respond to a relationship issue, and you're just playing those old patterns. You just react. And so a lot of what we're trying to take a look at is, am I reacting or am I actually choosing to move forward this way? So cultivating healthy personal boundaries you got to take a look at yourself, the relationship that you have with yourself, and you have to take a look at your relationships and going in them. And I also want to add that these boundary issues also affect systems, organizations, churches, we're seeing boundary issues here at Augustana because of all of the change with COVID, all of the change at Augustana. And a lot of it, yes, is based in fear. But boundary issues are really kind of hitting us in the face right now. So, what are those boundary categories? First of all, we all know about physical touch, personal space, sexual. We teach our kids these things. These are things that oftentimes people think of when they think of boundaries. I thought it was interesting that she added lewd comments in the sexual boundary area, and I was surprised when talking with a number of different women, the number of women that have had to put up with lewd comments in their work environments, and have had people that really do cross those boundaries on that. So I thought that was interesting. This one too was interesting to me because I think many times as Christians, we can feel guilty about the material possessions we have. And if there are people that have broader kind of senses of boundaries, we've had a hard time with people asking to, borrow our house trailer or do some of all of that. And it hasn't been people that really have been all that close to us. And so setting those boundaries, I thought was interesting when she talked about this. The other thing she talked about is areas of your home that are off limits. When you have people into your home, there may be people that have no sense of boundaries and, heaven forbid, are going to come through and then walk upstairs to check out all your bedrooms and stuff upstairs. That is not what you want to be doing at my house. And so I see the upstairs as kind of off limits. Mental boundary issues. So are you able to listen with an open mind, or would somebody call you narrow-minded and rigid? Can you do that while still holding on to your core beliefs? This is one of the things that I have really liked about the Lutheran theology and perspective. Lutherans have been able to look at a variety of different things while still having a core belief. There isn't this kind of group think type of mentality. Someone that makes demands. Anytime you make a demand, the outcome is not going to be good. You might get what you want, but the relationship will be destroyed. And we're hearing and seeing lots of demands now. Boy, I can't get over the number of people that know how to fix everything. Also, sometimes then someone can disparage your beliefs or disrespect your no. Those are all mental boundary violations. So again, this is some of what we are really dealing with our society right now. Emotional boundaries are healthy boundaries that prevent you from giving criticism or advice. There are people that's what they do. And you need to know that that's different, you guys, than suggestions. If I get somebody that comes to me and says, I found this book. This is really kind of cool. I don't know if you could use it. Or, I was really interested in learning more about this. I don't know if that's something other people would be. And maybe you could program that. All of those are very, very helpful suggestions. But if you have somebody that comes and says, this is what, Stace, this is what you're going to do, and they're not in a position to make that decision, that is crossing a boundary. So I think that's one of the things we need to take a look at as we move forward in relating with each other. Emotional boundaries that are healthy means you don't blame other people for how you feel. And you don't also accept blame for emotions that are not yours, or people's judgment or criticism or telling you how you feel. Someone who invalidates another person's feelings, tells you how to feel or should feel, or asks intrusive questions is violating emotional boundaries. Sometimes this could be done with the best of intentions. Sometimes people's heart are really in the right place. I choose to believe that most of the time they are. But in dealing with these kinds of things, there's a way to deal with them in healthy ways and unhealthy ways. So we all have a personal boundary blueprint. And it's informed by our parenting, our childhood experiences, by the norms that are in the culture, the gender roles, and a whole array of other factors as well. But we're going to take a look at a few of them. Some of the difference with men's and women's collective past kind of forms how we see boundaries. If you figure that women just over 100 years ago were basically the property of their husbands, there is this kind of internalized boundary that many women end up dealing with. First is women oftentimes won't speak up because you're afraid of being seen as a drama queen or worse. You can also, for women, everything is based on attractiveness. You take a look at our society and where the money is going with all the cosmetic stuff and everything else, we are still there. People do feel less valuable as they age or start to show signs of aging. That affects men too now in this culture, but more so maybe women. And then the big thing is that we have been trained that we prioritize the needs and desires of others above our own. Self-sacrifice proves that we are good. This can also tie into some Christian beliefs. Self-sacrifice means that you're a good Christian, and we will look at that a little bit later too. Some of the issues that deals with men's collective past, being authoritarian, not authoritative, but authoritarian shows strength. And research shows that authoritarian behavior is harmful. It is harmful to not only the person, but everybody else that they are dealing with. It is not a healthy boundary. And I think many times that's the way men have been trained. They've also been trained that rigid boundaries is a sign of power. When I say no, it means no, and I'm not going back on it. Well, that actually is not a healthy boundary. The fact that if somebody changes their mind, then they're wishy-washy and they show a weakness. So men have their own kind of set of things that they have had to deal with to be able to turn around and have more healthy boundaries. So we have a lot of corrupted boundary data in our background. So you need to take a look at it, unpacking the inherited beliefs that took root in childhood. You need to do that so that you can live your own authentic life. Somebody else really designed how you started to deal with boundaries. And if you have not taken a look at that, you are just reacting to what has happened in your past. I always worry a little bit when you start talk about your family of origin, because so many people sometimes can, get into blaming their parents, or I'm this way because it's my parents' fault. And I really have no time for that. Our parents did the best. They were living in a social era. They were coming out of dealing with how they were trained. And so I think to take a look at some of those things is so important for us without doing the blame. And actually, sometimes some of it is kind of funny. So when you think back to your childhood home, were people allowed to have their own private thoughts, conversations, and relationships? As a kid, were you able to have some privacy, some of those things, or did your parents have to know everything? Were you allowed or encouraged to express your ideas and feelings, especially if they were different from other members of your family? And then when there are conflicts in the family, did members talk issues out? Did they scream? Did they throw things? Did they not talk at all? Did they ignore it? Did they pretend it wasn't there? The author gave an example of a client she had whose family of origin would, go ahead and just scream at one another when there was anything. And I mean, it was like World War III. And when the young girl went and talked to her mom said, "What are you talking about? You know what? We were just discussing. You have the greatest imagination." So all of our families have kind of developed what we see about boundaries. And then, of course, you've got communication. Communication is really hard. Of course, ineffective communication is not direct. It could be passive or timid or reserved, or it could be angry, antagonistic, bullying, or aggressive. So as you communicate, it is important, first of all, to know what you want and what you feel, and we will look at that. But it needs to be direct. It needs to be the point. It needs to be assertive, but not aggressive or passive. So again, we're looking for that healthy kind of middle ground. And again, effective communication means you know how you feel and you learn to be responsive, not reactive. And again, that response and that react is knowing where it is that you're coming from and if you're dealing with past patterns. So here are some sneaky boundary blocks that actually happen with us in everyday life. She talks about having a VIP section. This is a group of people that you are connected to, but they are the people that add value to your life. They nourish, they energize you. They are worthy relationships. So there's respect, there's healthy compromise, there's a mutual understandings that are there. This is in your VIP section. Now, there's some people that don't even know that they have a VIP section, and no matter anybody that comes and asks or whatever and crosses boundaries, they're willing to open up. And that is not something that is healthy. This is not for people who just believe they belong there. You choose who is in your VIP section. And the reason why you do that is because we only have so much energy to deal with people, to deal with situations, to deal with problems. So even though this sounds really terrible and judgmental, and it makes me cringe a little bit, to have healthy boundaries, you need to make a distinction between higher and lower priority people. People that may just be acquaintances, you may not have the time and energy and choose not to deal with things with them. So knowing who is in your VIP section is a good thing. One way to take a look at that is, what relationships do you have that feel more like an obligation rather than a choice? Are you choosing to have a relationship with that, or do you just feel like I really have to? Another one is, do you always say yes? And this can be due just to lifelong conditioning. Somebody asks you to do something and you will always say yes. One of the things that can be really helpful, if you are a person that says yes continuously, is that you never have to give an immediate yes. You can always say, oh, you know what? That sounds really interesting, but I'm going to need to think about that. I'll get back to you in a couple of days. Do you overgive? Do you feel like it is your duty to give until you can't give anymore? I've heard some Christians talk this way, and I don't think that that's what God and Jesus had intended. I think, we all have to take good stewardship of our resources. And what the real question is if you're giving, am I giving out of a place of love, or am I giving it out of fear, or am I giving it out of need? And if you're giving it out of fear, it may mean that you're giving it because you'd be perceived as selfish, not a good Christian, or insensitive. If you're giving it out of a need, are you giving it because that's the only way you can feel good and in control and calm and worthy? So when you give of your resources, are you giving of those things out of a place of love? Or are you giving it out of a place that's coming from something that's not as healthy? Okay, do you agree now, but resent later? That's a big issue with boundaries. If you are resenting what you're doing, you set up poor boundaries. And I can't tell you the number of times that I do and have done that, and then taken a look and thought, well, you know what? You set this up on yourself, Stace. So do you refuse help? If you never ask for or accept for help, insist on doing everything yourself. This is the American independent way. Eventually what happens is you never get any help and you end up doing it all alone. Or another sneaky boundary thing that happens is, do you do that hyper positivity, Pollyanna kind of thing? And it's using that positivity to fix what the other person has shared. So somebody comes to you with an issue, and the first thing you say is you pat their hand and say, "Oh, well, God will take care of this. You just have to have faith." Or, you know what? Things always get better. They always change. Well, and if you've been the recipient on something like that, that doesn't feel real good. And truthfully, it's more of a form of denial and an inability to face reality from the other person. It's bad listening, and it's not your advice. You don't have to give them advice. Saying that, what, I will pray for you. I do believe that God helps in prayer. I am so sorry you're going through this. That is part of what's happening with boundaries there. Okay, are you a Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It? This happens a lot of times with men because of how they've been raised. But it also happens more and more with women. Do you automatically give advice? And I'm talking again, not about a suggestion. I'm talking about advice. Giving people unasked for advice or criticism robs them of their dignity. And I think that's a real good way to take a look at that. Your heart might be in the right place, but giving advice is never very helpful. This, I think, is really interesting because it is something that we don't talk about. It's invisible work. It's that kind of emotional and labor, and that emotional management and life management combined. It is that invisible work that we do to keep those around us comfortable and happy. I can't tell you the number of women that have said to me, "I feel so bad, but I cannot wait until these holidays are over. I just don't have anything more to give." And that is emotional labor. That is life management kind of combined with that. And many times this kind of work does fall on women, and it doesn't have to, because men have the same kinds of skills to do that kind of emotional labor. She also told a story of a woman whose sister ended up with cancer, incurable cancer. And not only did the sister take care of her sister who was dying, but she took care of all of her friends as well who were grieving through all of this. That totally sapped all of her energy, and it was emotional energy and labor, and she wasn't even allowing herself to deal with the grief of her sister's death. So it is often this unseen and underacknowledged work that drains us, that kind of sucks the life out of us. Perfectionism is another one. It's kind of that belief that if I do it all and I do it right, I'll be happy, worthy, and lovable. And perfectionism is unrealistic, but it's the belief that not only you, but also others. So there's a judgment portion of perfectionism, that they should and do and say and behave the way is right. And so perfectionism can creep up in some very interesting ways. So are you a perfectionist? Sometimes we all are in certain areas, in certain situations. Are you very critical of either yourself, and are you very critical of others? The whole idea that workaholism is a badge of honor, and that that's how you become successful. You work yourself to death. Do you replay past failures in your mind? And is everything personal? Are you highly sensitive to criticism? When we talk about being highly sensitive, most people think about crying and in tears and emotionally upset. But highly sensitive to criticism can also be responding in anger. It can also be responding in going ahead and trying to make things work in a way. So it can be manipulative, it can be a little bit of a tit for a tat type of thing. So you can see perfectionism show up that way in personal feelings. So dysfunctional boundary patterns include the inability to make discerning choices about who belongs in your VIP section, and just automatically accommodating others before considering your own needs, desires, and feelings. And again, dysfunctional boundary patterns can also show up in giving unsolicited advice, demands, and not accepting people's no's. Okay, now is not then. So if we have some boundary patterns that we may or may not be totally conscious of, how is it that we can react in a way that that is present moment, not dealt on the past? And sometimes that has to deal with limiting beliefs. These limiting beliefs can be seated in childhood, and they negatively affect our boundary behaviors and our self-identity. So it may be that, one of your limiting beliefs is, I really can't say something that's going to be, the least bit uncomfortable. I can't, I just simply can't do that. It could be that, I really don't think I'm smart enough to do this. And that could be a limiting belief from somewhere else. So being aware of what some of those kind of beliefs are that may not be true. Talk to people that have learned to go ahead and speak in public when at one time they couldn't do it. And just to even get up in front of a classroom made them sweat to the portion that it made everybody else uncomfortable. And, now they're turning around and talking to room full of 100 people and not having a problem. So again, sometimes our limiting beliefs are holding us back, and that also affects boundary behaviors. Another corrupted data is enmeshed systems. Oftentimes they talk about enmeshed systems in families, but it also can be in systems. And it's systems that demand groupthink patterns, where authentic feelings and responses can become buried if they differ from that of the group. We will see this, yes, in families, but we will also see this in religious organizations. Luckily, Lutherans do not usually have that sense of belief. It's usually with Lutherans, which is why I'm able to even teach this stuff, is that you can, have a variety of different opinions and beliefs. But if you get into more of the evangelical conservative Christian communities, there's a lot of this enmeshed group think type of behavior. Everybody is given a script, and that's what they are to believe in. I mean, even to the point that you don't marry outside of the community that has these beliefs. So when you are taking a look at situations or things where there are boundaries, it is really important to take a look at what she calls the 3 cues for clarity. So it helps you see when it is that you're maybe reacting out of your past. So who does this person or situation remind me of? So say you're in a situation and your very authoritarian boss comes up to you and wants to talk to you, and you immediately feel sick to your stomach, and you start to either shake, or you feel edgy, or you feel angry and ready for a fight. So who is this person reminding you of? Is it reminding you of a father who was very authoritarian and controlling? Was it a sibling? Was there a coach? Was there somebody else in your background that caused this reaction right now? And so where is it that I felt this before? Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm the kid and I'm sitting in front of my dad. And how is this behavioral or situational dynamic familiar for me? What has happened? So when you take a look at how that has happened before, then you can easily turn around and choose a different path and a different way of setting up healthy boundaries and how you would deal with that situation, which would be healthier for everybody involved. So if you're in conflict, you're feeling let down, or you're having issues in a relationship, sometimes it does help to think about, who is it that I'm becoming symbolically? Do I always turn into my 10-year-old self when there's a conflict? And who is it that they end up becoming? Am I always seeing somebody that is asserting control over me and not a mutually responsible relationship? That is it for today, guys. Thank you for being here. The next video that will complete this session on boundaries comes out on October 27th. And then on Tuesday, November 2nd in the evening, we will have our Zoom meeting if you'd like to discuss this material. Again, thanks and have a great day.